What an amazing moment at this crossroads of human evolution, where you do have people that still live with one foot in the Garden of Eden, beyond the edge of the map, and yet we have all this amazing technology. Let us use this new technology to celebrate ancient traditions, to build profound bridges of communication, and share the stories of cultures living on the edge that lie deep in the desert of our existence. So what I'd love to do tonight is take you on a bit of a journey. One's destiny is never certain, but for me it was close to inevitable. I was born into a long line of explorers. An ancestor within the family was an admiral in the British Navy, explored the outer edges of the known world in the 17th century, and Vancouver named Mount Rainier in his honor. My grandfather entered the world at the dawn of the 20th century in South Africa. He fought in the last great Zulu Wars, and after, spent 5 years walking the length of Africa writing books. My father grew up as a boy in the wilds of the Andes of South America, speaking the local Indian language before he taught himself English and Spanish. The Second World War broke out. He was repositioned to South Africa, and indeed, he forged his father's signature at 15 and was a Spitfire pilot in North Africa. I grew up in Africa, Australia, Europe, and the beaches of Southern California. I was born a gypsy, born with a curious heart, destined to use photography as a passport. So I'd love to share some images. My photographic journey began in the canyons and sacred Indian lands of the Southwest desert of America in the 1980s. I was honored to be Ansel Adams' last photographic assistant at the time. So from 1980 through 85, I worked with Ansel. And I think in between dashing to places like this, where I saw so many sacred symbols and universal kind of symbols that I would go on to see in other parts of the world, I was truly learning about photography, spending time with Ansel Adams. I really understood from him that all of life was art. It was a total immersion working with him. Georgia O'Keeffe would come through the door. We'd have amazing conversations. Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter were good friends. President Ford was good friends. Wallace Stegner, Vladimir Ashkenazi. I got my PhD not only in photography, but in humanity. And I think the greatest lesson I learned from working with Ansel was the use of photography as a social tool. He obviously used his photography for conservation, and many of the great national parks are in existence and continue to be in existence because of his work and the power of photography. So after I left the Ansel Adams studio, I really was in search of a sense of sacredness, a sense of seeing things the way that I had seen in the Southwest desert. One of the first journeys I took was to Varanasi in India, the city of light, the oldest city in India. For a Hindu, to die in Varanasi naturally is to be ensured of the ultimate transformation into enlightenment, ending the cycle of karma. Each morning, people come down to the Ganges, a river that flows from the high Himalayas, to pray and bathe in the early, bright, white light of Varanasi. Varanasi is home to Lord Brahma, the creator, Lord Shiva, the destroyer, the two most powerful Hindu gods. The struggle between these two forces is the struggle of good and bad, light and dark, divinity to Dante's Inferno. Here you will find the Lord of the Untouchables, the keeper of the burning guts, and the spirit being that holds the key to a person's reincarnation. So too, in Varanasi, you will find the worshippers of Lord Rama, tattooed with their entire body. This woman has entire tattooing over an incredible part of her body, all over her body. And it's Lord Rama, and she sits there and just chants this over and over and over. And with his morning offerings to the river Ganges, a Hindu man can be assured life is again in karmic balance. Traveling north of Varanasi, you arrive in the high country of Tibet, where here in the great peaks of the Himalayas, the driving winds and absence of water leaves life clinging sparsely to the landscape. Here you step to the edge and life has no room for extravagance. Here in the high mountains, it is possible to conclude that what you don't accomplish holds equal importance with what you do. Here, the absence of life and the void created by nature forces you to examine a spiritual dimension that we in the West sometimes lose in our trips to the store and the bathroom mirror. Here in Tibet, dreams of material possession and accomplishment are tinged with dark futility. After I left the Ansel Adams studio and began to travel in this area, I also wanted to linger. After a series of trips, I decided to slow down and embrace my exploration of Buddhism. So much of photography, if you're not careful, allows you just to bounce across the surface. You're looking for cliches, and you find the cliche, you grab that image, and you think you have a good image. No, it's an illusion. Slow down until the object of your attention affirms your presence, and that's what I wanted to do with my photography. So I had asked permission from a Rinpoche in a monastery, and I spent 4 months living in that monastery, peeling away the cliches, peeling away to the essence. For me, it was also an excuse to start a long life relationship to Buddhism, and I still conduct myself as much as possible within Buddhism. Very, very powerful experience. These are these Mani walls that stretch all the way across much of Tibet, Ladakh, Bhutan, Nepal, many places like that. The power of photography allows you to go beyond your expectations, go beyond the cliches, get to a position where you learn to ask the right questions. This is a very powerful symbol in the 20th, 21st century, appropriated by a different culture, but in fact it's one of the most powerful symbols in Buddhism, Hinduism, and many animistic cultures around the world. In Buddhism, it is the circle of life. In fact, the Hindu word for this symbol is swastika. It is the circle of life, the 4 dots there, earth, wind, fire, sky. I love photography because it allows me to go into situations where I have to let go of my preconceived notions and learn to ask the right questions, or I walk away with the stereotypes. And again, these Mani walls stretch across the horizon on the Tibetan plateau. Each and every one of those rocks are etched with the Tibetan chant, Om Mani Padme Hum, which loosely translated is, "O Buddha, give me eternal life. Allow me to continue to be reincarnated." I began a project about 15 years ago photographing tattooing and body marking around the world. So my interest in many of the locations I've been going over the years is to document that process of marking the body. Many tribal cultures, many indigenous cultures believe that the skin is an empty canvas waiting for a story to be told. As one goes through life and goes through initiation rituals, you're marked. And in this area, it's very unique because it's a combination of Buddhism and Brahmanism and sort of animistic worship of certain animals. You notice the pig on his stomach, the monkey or Garuda on his chest. In this particular area, they worship the elephant. You see the elephant tattooed around and down his knees. And then finally, this amazing gentleman who was the sole survivor of the Khmer Rouge when they came through, and he looks after the monasteries in this particular area. The other dimension of Asia is that of the ultra-fast, high-tech worlds like Japan, where the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, are both feared and respected. When I did my book, Ancient Marks, I wanted to include the Yakuza. And as you may know, they're extraordinarily dangerous and extraordinarily difficult to get a hold of. It took me 5 years of persistently going to Japan. I found a tattoo artist that I knew was linked to the Yakuza, and how I knew was that a part of his finger was missing. The Yakuza, the initiation ritual, you chop your own finger off. And so eventually, They realized I wasn't going to go away. Eventually, they allowed me in, and I spent about 10 days being, to use a popular word, embedded within the Yakuza. And powerful experience. Took this gentleman to Kyoto, the Sacred Rock Garden, if you've ever been there. Didn't even worry about getting permission because I knew I wouldn't get permission. So my assistant and I went in, chalked off the place, set up the lights. The gentleman came in with his tracksuit, and the monks were wondering what was going on, and I had probably about 35 seconds after he took off his tracksuit for him to step in, sit down. I got off 4 shots. The monks proceeded to pick me up along with my assistant and literally boot us out the door, and I have never gone into that monastery again, but I got the shot. So, and then the head of the Yakuza as concubine. This is the head concubine of the head of the Yakuza. So it was a very tense situation. Behind me were 3 300-pound bodyguards packing weapons, videoing me, ensuring that my very young, virile assistant, who was determined to sort of step in front of the model and get to know her, didn't get out of control. So I had more challenges with him than actually photographing her. So. So far, the punishment also by the Yakuza, if you do something wrong, is they chop off your little pinky. So far I've survived there. So as you come out of Asia, you arrive in Polynesia. This amazing archipelago scattered with a myriad of islands. And of course, this is the epicenter of the great migration, the Polynesian migration from west to east with the celestial navigators. We did much traveling throughout the area. And this whole region of the celestial navigation ranges from way up in the Solomon Islands as far southwest as New Zealand and over to Rapa Nui. This is in New Zealand. This is a Maori. And like many cultures around the world, he lives in 2 worlds. He has a traditional mocha tattoo that is sort of his mask, his spiritual identity, and you noticed he has a cross. He lives in both worlds, like many of us and many cultures around the world. So he is a Christian, yet he believes in his spiritual being. In the Samoan Islands, when a young man goes through the initiation of celestial navigation, after he's passed, so to speak, he has the traditional tattoo of a canoe tattooed onto his body. How they do that is they take this instrument with a shark's tooth and they literally tap the skin. The sound of that is ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta. That is the Polynesian word for tattooing. When Captain Cook and his sailors came into the region, sailed in, they were enamored not only with the tattooing, but the women, and they got tattooed, took the word ta-ta back to England, bastardized that word to tattooing, and that's how tattooing got reintroduced to modern European culture, and still has a stigma of sailors, motor bicyclists, things like that. And then each part of Polynesia, you can identify where they're from. This is from the Marquesas. He has the traditional tattooing. Absolutely interesting. I've spent a lot of time photographing in that area. And I continue to go to that area, and this sort of has continued to be an ongoing project. As you head out of the Polynesian area, you hit the South American coast. And of course, Peru, one of the most amazing sacred landscapes. I first started going to Machu Picchu in the early 1980s and have done many trips back, and find it a very, very sacred landscape, beautiful landscape. And spent about a month there in about the mid-1980s, specifically decided to go there during the rainy season so all of the mist could move around the ruins. People often ask me, why do I use black and white photography? Because I think there are things there go beyond color, that speak of spiritual things, that speak of things that go deep into the psychology of our human existence. This is the Nazca Lines on the coast of Peru. I decided to get into an airplane and subsequently have been back several different times. And both times that I really photographed, I felt like the message that I wanted to express came out more powerfully in the black and white. Alfred Stieglitz was married to George O'Keeffe. He had a project that he worked on and a statement that he made called equivalences. For me, what I'm trying to do is to give you the equivalent emotional reaction that I had at the time. Not the literal interpretation, but that sense of equivalence. What is that inner vibration that I am feeling, and how do I go about with the tools of photography to get that across? So to talk of Africa is to also talk about a lot of the issues that are going on. I covered a lot of the pressing issues of the end of the 20th century into the 21st century. I was a Time magazine war correspondent for about 15 years. One of the first places that I went to that I really cut my teeth was Somalia, and this was the early 1990s. If you recall your history, a huge famine going on. And so I had been trained as a photojournalist. I had been trained to be objective. I had been trained that the experience did not exist out of the frame of my camera. I was focused. I was young, I was driven, I was focused. If I didn't have that camera up to my eye, I was missing something. So having lived there for a year, covering the war, the conflict, one doesn't necessarily get numb, one just economizes one's emotions and stays very focused. And then one day we were driving along, and I was in the back seat of a Red Cross pickup truck, and we saw this building shimmering off in the desert, and we saw an old man there. We pulled up. I had been trained. Chance favors the prepared mind. I had the f-stop. I had the speed. Jumped out. Intuitively, I knew something was going to happen. Put the camera to my face. He reached from the dark into the light, into the hope, reaching for. I photographed. Noticed that he had his son, very ill, his wife and 3 kids, dead, already wrapped up in the white cloth, the traditional Islamic cloth. We put his son and him in the back of the pickup truck. I kept photographing. We were going to race to the hospital as quick as possible. It was about an hour away in Mogadishu. And I noticed the old man was very, very thirsty. And he spoke good English. And I said, I'll hold your son. I distinctly remember putting my camera down. I took his son, gave him, the older man, the bottle of water I had, and about 10 minutes later, the boy died in my arms. And my whole world shattered because I suddenly realized, how could I be in the middle of this and be objective? How can you be objective in a place like Baidoa where 300 people a day were dying? There were 2 doctors, 60 grave diggers. How could you be objective? It turned me upside down, made me realize if I was to be a storyteller, I had to be passionate. I had to become passionate. I had to roll around in it. I had to smell it. I had to get angry at it. And only then could I really be a storyteller. If a journalist tells you objectivity, they're lying. You have an opinion. You can be fair to both sides and express that, but let one's emotions out. And that, to me, has really informed the way I've photographed ever since, to immerse myself into it. One of the great privileges of exploration is the possibility, and that possibility is diminishing well into the 21st century, of coming across people that had never seen white people before, never had that experience of an exchange. We live in a world where obviously so many things are happening that to have that opportunity is such a rare privilege. I had heard about on the island of New Guinea, there's a place called the Bird's Head, which is up in the northwest part of Irian Jaya, extraordinarily isolated. We put together an expedition in search of a tribe that had never had contact. 3 weeks in, we came across this tribe, and we spent close to 10 days with them and had that wonderful engagement of what it feels like to kind of step back in time, to have nonverbal communication, to work with people and try and come to common grounds. It's interesting, the more I travel, and I'm paid to find differences. I'm paid to find things that are visually different, visually exotic. But the more and the older I get, the more I travel, the more I realize that we're all very similar. It's regardless of whether we're sitting in the Sahara Desert or the highlands of Irian Jaya, or sitting down with an Iraqi or someone from South America. Often the language is, do you have children? You know, do you have a family? And it begins there. And that is a great gift that I have really just begun to truly understand as I travel. So we spent our time there. I had finished photographing. It was a late afternoon, and the sun was out, and all of a sudden a storm kind of rolled up through the valley. Everybody scrambled around and put on their very designer banana leaf raincoats. And the storm lingered, passed, and then this brilliant sunset came out. And I was sitting there, kids frolicking around me, and then I looked up in the sky, and some 30,000 feet above me was a jet, white jet, carving across, probably on its way from Cairns or Brisbane or Sydney, on its way to Tokyo, people madly working away. And it struck me, what an amazing moment to be alive at this crossroads of human evolution. What a privilege it is for all of us to be alive at this moment where you do have people that still live with one foot in the Garden of Eden, beyond the edge of the map. And yet we have all this amazing, amazing technology. So here we are, deep in the 21st century. Let us take one last look over our shoulder at the millennium behind us. What cultural traditions do we leave behind, and which ones do we carry with us into this new century of technology, information, and profound cultural choices? How will these new tools affect us? While an Ethiopian priest, after his first prayers and before the morning light falls on his computer, will be emailing his shaman friend in Asia. And why not? There are cyber cafes in Timbuktu and smartphones in the jungles of New Guinea. New Guinea has just started issuing smartphones to all of their elders and their teachers that live in very isolated parts, loaded up with apps around education, emergency medical care, language documentation. It's an incredibly excited time. Indeed, we're all a part of a modern planet yearning now more than ever for a dialogue among civilizations. Let us use this new technology to celebrate ancient traditions, to build profound bridges of communication, and share the stories of cultures living on the edge that lie deep in the desert of our existence. Thank you.